What's up, dinguses? My name is Jerry Bees. It's been a while since I've done a tier list video, but I'm not really doing any reaction videos at the moment, so I figured now is the perfect time. The one question we have to answer tonight is this: can somebody born in Generation Z accurately rank the greatest classic rock guitarists of all time? We're gonna have that answer tonight. I have scoured the internet for a tier list that I thought gave a good enough representation for the greatest classic rock guitarists of all time, with some wildcard additions from the non-classic rock era. So that comes from guitarists from the 90s or even really the 2000s. However, in the tier list that I'm going to use for this video, and I'll link it down in the description, there is over 130 or 140 different guitarists from all different eras, and I've left quite a few of them out. Examples being guys like Bo Diddley, Albert King, Curtis Mayfield, B.B. King. I just can't talk about them. So if there's any guitarist that you see on the tier list that I'll link down below that you say I should know a little bit more, let me know why. But I think I have a good spread of classic rock guitarists here. There is 66 that I'm going to be talking about tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I don't know, I got a whole bunch of shit down in my description for you to click on. I got the Twitch page where I go live and you can see me there, or my Patreon if you want to support the channel. Just click all of the links. I swear they're all safe. It's not a scam. Just click them all, okay? Cool. I grew up on a lot of classic rock as a part of my parents' doing, which was the result of a lot of jokes made my way at school when I was just talking about a bunch of old dudes growing up. But my infatuation with older music got to the point where I would even like acts that my parents didn't like. Like, both of my parents hated Bob Dylan, right? They're like, screw that guy. We don't like him at all. And I realize him for the God King that he is. So I would like to say I got a little bit more credibility here, but there might be some people of an older generation than I who are going to disagree with this. So please let me know your thoughts down in the comments as I go through each one of these legendary guitarists. So as you can see, as far as the tiers go, and I grabbed these tiers straight from the original tier list, we have GOAT, Legend tier, Iconic tier, Great Guitarist, Good Guitarist, Cool Vibes, and Medium tier. Now, there's a lot here, and I just picked out the ones that I could actually talk about, you know, where I know enough of their work. I do appreciate this tier list in particular because there is no like F tier or anything like that. I think that we can all appreciate that if we don't necessarily like one certain band, that, you know, there's not really any excuse to call them bad musicians. And there's actually quite a few examples on this list of bands that I really don't like all that much, but you gotta give credit where credit is due to their guitarists. So I kind of put these all in not a specific order at all, but I think it's very fitting that Jimi Hendrix ended up first, and there's really no denying that Jimi Hendrix is, or should be considered to be, one of the, if not the greatest guitarist of all time. Are there metal guitarists that are out there now who may have more technical prowess in their ability to play the guitar? Absolutely 100%. And I think there's more technically talented guitarists on this list that are going to rank lower than Jimi Hendrix, because a lot of how I'm going to be judging this list going forward is not how technically good they are, but how much soul are they putting into it. And, you know, can they still be very technical while still putting in a lot of soul and a lot of groove to their music too? And, you know, maybe some of those, well, they might not just be very technical, but they can lay down a nice groove. They're going to go in the Cool Vibes tier, but it's Jimi, you know? And I think Jimi might fall into the curse of the 27 Club, just in the sense that, you know, some argument against them could be like, well, I think a lot of the legend is that the fact that they died, and, you know, we only have a very small sample size. But I think that is even a discredit to everything that, you know, Jimi Hendrix and his band. It's Jimi, and he played the guitar backwards, right? Sometimes when I need to feel something, I just put on Valleys of Neptune, the song, and then the album. And then I listen to Valleys of Neptune, the song, twice. It's just a good time. Moving on, we got Pete Townsend of The Who. One of these days, I'm going to respect The Who the way that I should. If you watched my God, it feels like it's ancient at this point. My Gen Z ranks classic rock bands video. I got a lot of pushback on where I ranked The Who. I think I only put them on B tier. And I like The Who a lot. I do. I like a lot of their songs, and I feel like they're very multifaceted, but there's just something about their catalog as a whole that I just don't think are as good as other classic rock bands. But that being said, Pete Townsend is a good guitarist. Now, with Keith Moon, the original drummer for The Who, he'd probably go in legend tier. You know, he'd be going up a little bit higher too. We got Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac, and he's going to go in good guitarist tier and the only reason that is because of this clip from SNL.
But before we go, Lindsey Buckingham, we're going to have to cut your song. I'm sorry, Lindsey. Yeah, come on, Lindsey. Don't be like that. Come on now. Nah, there you go, Lindsey. There you go. You're my best friend.
You know, I feel, because Lindsey Buckingham is very talented, but also we, on stream the other day, we're going over the Rolling Stones 100 greatest rock bands of all time, and Fleetwood Mac was not on that list, and that is just an incredible disservice. So, ladies and gentlemen, we got to give Lindsey Buckingham. Come on. Yeah, could not, and will not ever understand why Fleetwood Mac was not on that list. Moving along here, we have David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. Now, David Gilmour is going to go in GOAT category because, and I think it's pretty good here, that we have Jimmy and David right next to each other because they are two very different guitarists in my mind. Was Jimmy a little bit more of a virtuoso of the guitar? Was he more technically talented? Yes, but for me, growing up, starting to listen to Pink Floyd, it was David Gilmour's guitar on the first Pink Floyd album I ever listened to, Dark Side of the Moon, where that was the first instance to where I felt music could talk to me. It could speak to me in a way that nothing else really could speak to me, and they weren't even using words. Pink Floyd is a very lyrically dense band as well, with Roger Waters' writing. And so I was like, damn, like words are cheap. And I think when it comes to David Gilmour, words are cheap. You know, he's saying something with that guitar and he gets it to make these noises to where if you have the ear for it, then you might find out more about yourself than you already did. I don't know. I really like Pink Floyd. I scarred my body for them. Moving on, we got Joe Satriani. If you've ever played any of the Guitar Hero, I don't know if he was in any of the Guitar Hero games or the Rock Band games. I get that mixed up, but I think a brand new generation got introduced to Joe Satriani through the video games. And this is an example of somebody who is so technically good at guitar, it pisses me off. I probably should have said this earlier. I do play guitar. There is one of my guitars right there. I am not a noodler, right? I'm not a lead guitarist. I know a couple scales, but I don't play it with any type of quickness. You won't ever catch me playing an arpeggio. I like punk rock rhythm guitar, right? That's what I can do. So that means I can just barely play the guitar. The thing with Joe Satriani is you got to be an already like very talented guitar player or like be into guitar to really know who he is. He is a student of the game to every degree. It's not the most accessible music to where, I think Jimmy kind of, at least so far on this list, Hendrix kind of blurred the lines between that where you could still kind of groove with it. And you can still definitely kind of groove with Joe Satriani. But that's why it's that other part to judging this. I guess commercial success is something that I'm judging too. And I'm going to put him, I think I'm going to keep him in iconic. He is an icon. He is a true guitar hero. Legend for the few. Legend for the few, iconic to many, if you know who he is. I think that'd be enough reason to maybe move him down to great, but I think he's better than a great guitarist. Next up, we have Carlos Santana. I am quite familiar with the early Carlos Santana stuff from the 60s and 70s. I'd say the first two albums and then Amigos is where a lot of my familiarity with Santana lies. And of course, Santana's Greatest Hits, one of the best Greatest Hits albums of all time, in my opinion. But Santana took a lot of these sounds that weren't necessarily rock and roll sounds and made them rock and roll. And his He's got a really good story about playing at Woodstock, taking some illicit substances there, and he's just trying to get through the song thinking that his guitar is a snake. I think that's Santana. That's Santana for sure, right? If anybody's seen that documentary. But I think we put Santana in legend because I think between technical ability and the legacy that he's left behind and for how much crossover he did with the genre, I feel very comfortable putting Carlos Santana in legend here. So we got Mick Mars from Motley Crue. In my classic rock tier list video where I'm ranking all the bands, I do take a shit on hair metal, as well you should, in my opinion. I don't really like a lot of those bands, and it's great that they've had staying power for the people who, you know, grew up listening to them. You know, if we're going to say that Van Halen and Guns N' Roses are the best hair metal bands, I don't think that Motley Crue is terribly far behind, and a lot of that has to do with Mick Mars. So I'm going to be putting Mick Mars in great guitarist because I think the way his guitar sounds and the tones that he uses in a lot of the Motley Crue songs are just amazing, just listening to the guitar itself. But man, if you don't believe me, man, just go listen to that guitar solo in Kickstart My Heart for the 1000th time. And it just gets me going every single time. And even like, you know, so some of the simpler jams like Wild Side, it's just so tasty to me. It was kind of fast too. So yeah, Mick Mars, great guitarist. So we got Ted Nugent, right? And I think, you know, anybody of any which political affiliation will feel one type of way about Ted Nugent. But I'm going to put Ted Nugent in good guitarist. You know, I when I got my first record player, you know, my first turntable, I did have Cat Scratch Fever on vinyl. And it was just perfect for me when I was growing up, you know, like 12 or 13 years old. But recently, and I know it's like his hit song, but I never really listened to it a lot growing up. But Stranglehold, right? That is like the Ted Nugent song behind Cat Scratch Fever. And there's just something about that song that I never really appreciated before. And it's a simple guitar groove, but sometimes that's all it is. It's how do I use this thing to make people feel good? And I think Ted Nugent is a student of the game in that regard. So he's going into good guitarist. He's a good guitarist. Now, Freddie King, I did include on this, and I don't think I should have because I don't know him entirely, but he's got the one song, man. What is that song? Going Down, right? And he just, and it's a hard blues song, but he just absolutely belts it out. And that comes through in the guitar too. I feel like he's playing it very aggressively, and given the sound of his voice too, and it's why blues was so effective, right? You just feel all of the pain and anguish in that track. And I think, you know, I can't tell you the exact date that song was recorded, but it is held up very well, in my opinion, for an older song. So we'll do great guitarist as a way of conveying emotion. Everybody has watched Dave Mustaine become a god. And I'm glad that I have watched Dave Mustaine be a god, seeing him live. I saw Megadeth live in 2023, and maybe some original OG Megadeth fans will say, oh, it was better on this tour, it was better on that tour. Or if you're a fan of early Metallica, you say, fuck Dave Mustaine. And he's seems to be a very polarizing figure in metal, but I think his work to kind of establish thrash metal as a subgenre of metal, it just wouldn't be the same. You might still have Metallica doing what they're doing. You still might have Slayer doing what they're doing. Dave Mustaine makes unapologetically like unique metal. And maybe I should listen to more metal, but there's just something about the way that he points that band that doesn't really make me feel the same with any other band. Dave Mustaine is the only metal guitarist with a cameo in Duck Dodgers. Fun fact. So we got Gary Rossington from Lynyrd Skynyrd. Any Lynyrd Skynyrd guitarist, whether or not it's Gary or any of the guys who lost their lives on the terrible plane crash that really killed the band, and they've kept it going. But I think Gary's like one of the only surviving members, or has he passed away? Oh yeah, he passed away last year. I think maybe Southern rock maybe had some of its roots down, but to get that on a wider scale, they charted with Sweet Home Alabama and all that stuff, and the pure odyssey that is Freebird. I'm not going to, talk forever about Freebird, or as I like to call it, Cocaine, the song. All the guitars in Lynyrd Skynyrd for a Southern rock band really just upped the bar, and they really gave more than I think was required of them. Now, this might be controversial. I am looking at how they are remembered as a guitar player and guitar player alone. And Johnny Cash is going to go in Cool Vibes. I don't have a boo sound effect, but I'd be playing a boo sound effect because I feel like a lot of people would say, like, oh, why are you ranking Johnny Cash so low? Johnny Cash is a phenomenal songwriter. This was a songwriting tier list. He'd be up here, right? But I don't really think of Johnny Cash as a guitar hero, as it were. And the same can be said about Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's going in the GOAT tier of songwriting. That's just how it goes. But I think out of everybody here, I'm going to rank Bob Dylan the lowest. And actually, I might even rank Johnny Cash lower, but I don't know. Johnny Cash is groovier. He's a little bit funkier. It's just harder country than it is to Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's more folky, right? And I'm not to say, this isn't like F-tier guitar player. This isn't the Corey Feldman tier. This is the medium tier, and I think Bob Dylan himself would look at this and go, yeah, okay. He's probably looking at Timothée Chalamet's performance in the movie about him, and he go, okay. I don't really feel like I'd be phasing Bob Dylan a lot by doing that. All right, moving on, we have George Harrison. Again, another phenomenal songwriter and the best guitarist in the Beatles, but he's a good guitar player. I say that, and then my mind immediately went back to While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And then, on his solo stuff, too, with All Things Must Pass, I think the song Wawa is amazing, but I think I feel pretty good about putting George Harrison in good guitarist. George was probably the best Beatle. I think besides Paul, definitely had the better solo songs. No, George Harrison as a singer, songwriter, musician, on the whole, he'd probably go up to great and iconic just on him alone, but this is for guitar playing and as a guitarist alone. Now, somebody who's, I think, better than George Harrison and Dave Mustaine and Mick Mars and Freddie King and Gary Rossington. We got Stevie Ray Vaughan, gone well before his time. I think Stevie Ray Vaughan was the next, he was like a slightly less psychedelic Hendrix, a little bit more honky-tonk, bluegrassy, southern rock. And if it weren't for a lot of the blues guys, you wouldn't have you wouldn't have anybody on this list if it weren't for the OG blues guys. But Stevie Ray Vaughan managed to take blues and somehow elevate it for the masses, and there might be some bespoke blues guitarists that I'm completely unaware of. But Stevie Ray Vaughan brought it to, hit singles. And, I think anybody learning to play guitar, like me growing up, you listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan and you go, how the hell do I get that good at guitar? Because it seems easy, and it probably is with enough practice, but it was quite daunting for me. So, yeah, Stevie Ray Vaughan is just one of those heroes. All right, so up next, I think Keith Richards should be an icon, but I'm going to put him in great guitarists. It's as far as technical prowess is concerned, the Rolling Stones aren't really known for that. They definitely do put down a phenomenal groove. And, I think they are the quintessential classic rock band. And, Keith Richards is just a marvel, and he's a true specimen of the human race. He really is. But is he better than Stevie Ray Vaughan, Joe Satriani, Carlos Santana? No, I do not think so. So Frank Zappa, this is another one where great songwriter, great visionary, but I don't think that he's a phenomenally good guitar player. Or I never listened to Frank Zappa's albums. You know, I wasn't sitting there listening to Joe's Garage, waiting for, you know, the next Frank Zappa guitar solo or anything like that. Now, but his direction for the band, you know, whether it's the Mothers of Invention or anything else that he put his hands on, I think, in my opinion, turned to gold. I think Frank Zappa is a true artist in every sense of the word, but guitar player, he's a good guitar player. He's a fine guitar player. Now, Tom Morello kind of pisses me off. Tom Morello kind of pisses me off just because, I don't know, I hear him when I had satellite radio, and his song, or his show, was it on Lithium? I don't know. He's got his show, and you know, he's a cool guy. He brings his mother on, and his mom's like 98. I don't know if she's since passed, but R.I.P. Ms. Morello. But he's a little bit too commercial for me, and I think I wouldn't have a problem with any other person if they weren't from Rage Against the Machine. Like there's a reason why we don't hear from Zach De La Rocha, right? Because he's like, no, fuck that. This is the fucking system. Fuck you. I'm not doing your little fucking monkey dance. And Tom Morello's like, oh, let me make a masterclass. Right? Let me just shill a little bit more. And I don't like get your bag, get your money, but I think it's just completely antithetical to the Rage Against the Machine's mission. But as a guitar player, you can't say, you know, if you were around when Rage Against the Machine first came out with their first record, you know, and they released it to the masses, that you had heard guitar like that before. You know, there may have been some one-off examples here or there, but he was experimental with it, and how they fused funk and metal and punk, and he set the bar so high for that generation. And I know Rage Against the Machine isn't really classic rock, so he's one of those more wild card examples today that we're going to talk about. But I can complain about his corporate leanings all I want to, despite all the messaging in Rage Against the Machine. But with that said, he's an iconic guitarist. He definitely is. Angus Young, the most technically amazing guitarist of all time? No, every AC/DC song sounds the same. But as far as, given the word iconic, actually, you know what? Fuck that. Angus Young is a legend. That schoolboy uniform and his little duck... No, he doesn't do a duck walk. Whatever. He definitely does not do a duck walk. Whatever that walk is called that he does while playing live, he is a true showman. And I think and this is probably the story for a lot of us watching this video right now, when you are a young child baby and you are getting into rock and roll, there is not a more accessible band for you to get into than AC/DC. It's easy to understand. It's the same 3 chords, but they rock it the fuck out every single time. And a lot of Angus Young's success and the guitar sound of AC/DC has to do with the dual threat of him and his brother Malcolm, R.I.P. King. Oh my God. But I think that band's backbone is Angus Young. And he became this guitar poster child and got people like me to want to play the guitar. And, you know, I do the little fucking not the duck walk in our rooms with our guitars. So iconic, absolutely. Legend, yes. Moving on to Jerry Garcia. This is where some of my personal preference is going to come into play way more than it already has, because I'm going to put Jerry Garcia in the legend category. You may not like the Grateful Dead, and I might even say that that's a fair point. I love the Grateful Dead, and I'm not the biggest Grateful Dead fan in the sense that I've listened to every single live cut they've ever done, because to be a Grateful Dead fan, or to be a Deadhead, you have to listen to at least some type of quota of their live catalog, because that's where a lot of the appeal lies in them. For Jerry Garcia, sure, you might listen to one of the live cuts and go, okay, this dude's just on acid. What the fuck is this? But you hear some of those performances and some of his solos, and you're just amazed that somebody has that much control over their instrument on the fly. His improvisation is incredible. And because of the concept of the Grateful Dead being like a jam band and, they never play the same song the same way twice, that comes through, I think, first and foremost through Jerry Garcia. And my favorite time Jerry Garcia ever did anything with the guitar is, and I want to get the exact date on this right, it was in New York City, April 1971 at the Fillmore East. And his guitar solo during Sugar Magnolia, I put that on to feel something. I think we all have those songs or those moments in songs where it's like, I need to pick me up right now. I need to be inspired by something. I need to be taken away. And for me, it's that guitar solo, Sugar Magnolia, from April 1971 at the Fillmore East. It's on an album called Ladies and Gentlemen, The Grateful Dead. Is one of my favorite times anybody's ever done anything with the guitar. And I think, he's kind of the mascot for the band behind their 90,000 other mascots. But yeah, Jerry Garcia is a legend. Absolutely a legend. Peter Frampton, speaking about live cuts, Peter Frampton is going to go into Good Guitarist, lays down a phenomenal groove, and Frampton Live is one of the greatest live albums ever made. And, he's such a little cutie, so we can't just put him in cool vibes. All right, so in my classic rock tier list video, I said that Mark Knopfler was the most underrated guitarist of all time, and that is still true. You might even say that Mark Knopfler is perfectly rated. Everybody knows. No, fuck that. Listen to their self-titled again. I was on a long drive recently, so I just put their self-titled on, their debut album. And I'm just sitting there listening to Down to the Waterline. How many times does he pick up his hand? He probably doesn't pick it up at all, but then how is he fucking doing all that? It just blows me away every single time. And Mark Knopfler, I think, along with Jerry Garcia, so honestly, Angus Young here is kind of the odd man sitting out in the legend tier. I think the wider aura of Angus Young helps him get into that legend tier for me, but Mark Knopfler, it's that perfect blend of accessibility and technicality. And you don't get much better than Mark Knopfler, in my opinion. You just can't. And forget like how well he can play the guitar, but the tones that he's playing behind, Money for Nothing, Chicks for Free, just that. Oh, it's so tasty. The guitar sound in that song is so tasty. Moving on, we got Brian May from Queen. I'm pretty sure that we can put Brian May in legend. A lot of that has to do with just how smart of a person he is, but here is he more iconic. I think that hairdo he has is like, so iconic, if we want to judge it off of that on semantics alone. But I think Brian May, carried on the composition skills that he has when, Queen kind of weren't as guitar oriented. But I think that big old brain of his, put into the guitar and what came out of it and what he was able to do with it. I got yelled at a lot on my classic rock band tier list video when I was ranking all the artists and bands in general for, I think I put Clapton in F tier just because he was crazy. And Eric Clapton is crazy, but I think it's time that I give credit where credit's due. I either put him at the top of legend or in GOAT because he's the white man of blues. That's just what it is, right? Actually, I'll say legend here because Eric Clapton, it's blues done the right way if you're just looking at it from his solo stuff. But then you look at the stuff from Derek and the Dominoes and Cream, and Cream especially. Cream was one of those bands that they were a flash in the pan. They were only really around recording with each other for a couple of years, a few years, but the impact they left on the genre was like undeniable. Yeah, I know, boo, kind of overrated. He is, but like, dude, like his cover of Crossroads, it's so good. It is like the perfect way to play the guitar. It just is. Why was I waiting for the Bone Thugs Crossroads? Neil Young is gonna be a medium tier. I boo. I don't particularly care for Neil Young. This is where my personal preference might be getting in the way to see them a little bit more objectively. So let me know your opinions on where I'm placing Neil Young in this. You know what? No, I'll give him credit. I'll put him in cool vibes. You know, you look at the shit that he did with Cries of Stills, Nash and Young, and, you know, or you call it, you know, the psychedelic pill shit I know came out like so much later. He's a fine Canadian boy. Neil Young is a fine Canadian boy. So moving on, I think maybe my GOAT category is a little too transparent. It is very like, I'm not going to deviate from it too much because Jimmy Page is a GOAT. Jimmy Page might be going into GOAT just for his songwriting and composition, or in his composing skills in general. But as a guitarist, I think there's a reason why, you know, there might be a more general consensus that, you know, Led Zeppelin is the greatest rock band of all time because they tick all of the boxes. And you did that because of Jimmy Page, and you couldn't have done it without John Bonham behind the drums. You know, John Paul Jones there making sure everything sounded just right. But Jimmy Page was a visionary. He, whether he was picking up the mandolin or the 12 string, it didn't matter. He was going to melt your face off. And I'll even extend, it's not just his work with Led Zeppelin, you know, it's his work with the Yardbirds. And I think, you know, if you look at Led Zeppelin as the quintessential rock band, not just classic rock band, you know, I think the quintessential classic rock band is the Rolling Stones. I think in their iconography and just how they're viewed, at least in America, it's the Stones. But I think it just as fuck classic rock, just rock band, despite era, despite generation, it's Led Zeppelin. And you can't be the greatest rock band of all time if you don't have somebody who could be the greatest guitarist of all time. And you go into any song in that catalog for the most part, and I think it comes out pretty true why that's the case. You know, from maybe, you know, how slow and aggressive it got in Dazed and Confused all the way to like 10 Years Gone, and just that subtlety to it all. It's beautiful. And then they fucking, like, could you imagine, like, this is why I think this shit is like so cool, and like listening to older music, especially like, you know, older music that you knew was like transformed the world. Led Zeppelin is one of those bands. Because imagine you're sitting there. It's 1970. You've never heard Immigrant Song before. And then, like, like, I get it. He's playing the same thing over and over and over again. But it's like, ugh, what the fuck is that? It got, you know, you can be like, damn, this is like scary. So, we're going to put Bruce in good guitarist. I feel like Bruce as a guitarist brings cool vibes. But how he was able to weave the guitar into the E Street Band sound, I think that took somebody who knew how to work the guitar a little bit more. And I'm speaking praise of of an act that I don't really care for. You know, I can take or leave Bruce Springsteen, but I think he's known for his guitar, and I think for good reason. So I think I'm gonna put Nancy Wilson at the top of good guitarist, and you can band shirt me on this. I don't give a shit. I've listened to a little bit of Heart, right? I'm not the biggest Heart person, but you can't listen to Crazy on You and tell me that I'm wrong. I believe there was a what the hell is his name from Anthrax? There's a great quote from Scott Ian. Some people will say, yeah, Heart is good for girls. Fuck that. Heart is good. And I got to agree. I'm putting Nancy Wilson there. That's where. And the same is true for The Edge from U2. He has a very distinctive style, but so often I've always felt that it's very much the exact same. It's very pretty. The Edge plays the guitar a very pretty way, but it doesn't really blow my socks off like everybody else who comes up. I think you wouldn't have the U2 sound without The Edge, but it's whether or not I think that sound is, like, coming from a guitar standpoint, is more prolific or better, quote unquote, than anybody above him. It's the beanie that gives him strength. You're right. You're right. It is the beanie. It is the beanie. So Tom Petty, again, if this was a songwriting tier list, and if you're unaware of how many songs Tom Petty wrote for other people, you gotta Google that right now, because he had his fingerprints all over the music industry. Tom Petty is one of the greatest American songwriters that's ever lived. So you got to put him up here as far as songwriting goes. Guitar-wise, I'm hazarding to put him in great, but I'm going to put him in good. It's not the reason why I go to Tom Petty or the Heartbreakers most of the time. It's to hear his voice. It's to hear the stories that he's laying down and those emotions. So yeah, I think just for that, he's got to stay in good. Nile Rodgers, I'm going to say he's going to go in great just because of he's just got a style. Unlike The Edge, to where I can go, okay, well, it's just kind of like the one style, it's fine. The Nile Rodgers style is undeniable. And you're like, oh, maybe I haven't heard Nile Rodgers and I was born in 2000 or I was born in 2008. Nobody's born in 2008, but maybe you were born in 2008. Like, I don't know who Nile Rodgers is. Yes, you do. Now, if you don't know that song and you're still like, I still don't know who Nile Rodgers is, then there is no helping you. May God have mercy on your soul. No, yeah, Nile Rodgers goes into great. Now, this is an interesting addition here. This isn't necessarily a classic rock guitarist to any degree, but they have Josh Homme here, but they're attributing him from Kyuss, which I kind of get. And this is one where I don't know whether to put Josh Homme in great guitarist or good guitarist. I'll put him in great because Josh Homme, if you don't know, Josh Homme from Kyuss and from Queens of the Stone Age. Queens of the Stone Age is a top 10 band for me. They always have been. They always probably will be. And with Kyuss, Josh Homme kind of cemented the stoner rock subgenre of rock and roll. So he gets a lot of credibility for kind of being I wouldn't even say pioneer, because those sounds that he was using, whether you call it like Ozzy worship, desert rock, whatever the hell you want to call it, but it was just fuzz pedal power chords to smoke pot to. And it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And I think that comes through more in Kyuss than it does in Queens of the Stone Age. But if you look at Josh Homme's work in Queens of the Stone Age, it's somebody who knows how to put down one fuck of a groove. It's just so fun to listen to. It's like such good, unapologetic rock and roll to me. And I think so. So Josh Homme kind of helped carry the torch into the 2000s where, in the 2010s and, the 2020s now, where rock doesn't have as much, cultural cachet as it were anymore. And I argue that it doesn't have to, but Josh Homme was definitely one of those guitar heroes that really helped hold the torch into the next generation. All right, so we got Prince. Prince is going to go up in legend tier. If we're talking about an artist in general, I think you put Prince in GOAT. I threw some of my Taylor Swift reaction videos. If anybody wants to watch those, they're on my channel. But, how you might judge an artist as a whole is like you look at it as a triangle, right? And each side of the triangle, you have musicianship, showmanship, and then songwriting, right? And it's kind of those, you can judge off of those three. You don't have to. You can add more criteria, but I think that's a good way of looking at it. I think Prince maxes out all of those sides for the most part. The only thing that's keeping Prince from going higher on the guitar tier list is because he was already so much better than everybody else on every other instrument. Like, the dude plays every single instrument, does everything himself, or at least he did. Rip legend, air horn for Prince. So I don't know. If you think Prince deserves to be in the GOAT category for guitar, let me know down in the comments, but I don't know. I don't know. I feel like considering who's above him as far as guitarists, this makes sense. This makes sense to me. Tony Iommi, he's going to go in legend tier. For those not in the know, it says so right there, but maybe you can't read it. Tony Iommi is the guitarist of Black Sabbath. So like Josh Homme, created a subgenre of rock and roll. So if the subgenre that Josh Homme created was stoner rock, you would not have stoner rock without Black Sabbath. Because stoner rock took a lot from Black Sabbath. Kyuss took a lot from Black Sabbath. Just as far as, just like that fuzzy sounding guitar. And the subgenre that Tony Iommi helped to usher in was metal. They're the greatest. Black Sabbath is so good, and they're good partially because of Tony Iommi. And in that classic rock tier list that I made all those months back, I told the famous story that Tony Iommi lost a finger in a sheet metal factory on his last day of work, and how he fashioned like a nub so he could still play guitar. And it's dedication, folks. It is Tony Iommi's dedication that we are celebrating here tonight. It's not even just like technical prowess either, but it's how you convey tone and emotion, right? And with Black Sabbath, the first song Black Sabbath ever put on a record was Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath off of their album Black Sabbath. And you just can't get any better than this. And, there's tons of other examples just on this first album that I can play. But I think just that opening lick with looking at the album cover for the first Black Sabbath album, it looks terrifying. This album, it is so scary. And that being the first thing you hear, like, oh my God, visionary, an absolute visionary. Chuck Berry, weird as shit, really, really weird guy, but he was the OG guitar hero. We wouldn't have anybody else without Chuck Berry, and I don't know if it's because it's the nostalgic sound, but I would even argue that a lot of the Chuck Berry performances and, studio recordings hold up very well. Maybe it's just because it was bare bones. It's just that R&B and that swing, just from the 50s, that cauldron of, blues and offshoot that would become rock and roll was there. But Chuck Berry took everything that made all of those genres great and ran with it with his guitar. Yeah, and it just grooved. So this is where you got to pay homage to the OGs. You got to pay homage to the OGs here. Now this one's kind of an offshoot because he's definitely not as prolific as I'd think anybody on this list. But we have Ry Cooder, and I like Ry Cooder quite a bit. I am the most familiar with the Ry Cooder anthology, The UFO Has Landed. So there were, let's see, I got mine. Ry Cooder kind of operates in that it's kind of like a Dixie sound, and it's just always fun. I can't be in a bad mood listening to Ry Cooder, even though there's like some real sad shit there. But I don't know. There's just something about how kind of jumpy it is for me a lot of the time. So Paul Simon, again, an amazing songwriter, but he's not really known for his guitar. Even though, I mean, there's moments when it shines, and Paul Simon is a lot like me, folks, right? He's a great rhythm guitarist, really knows how to lay down a great groove, but I can't put him any higher than good guitarist. Songwriter-wise, we're at probably about legend, but he's a good guitarist. Honestly, same deal with Willie Nelson. I might even, better than George Harrison, not as good as Ted Nugent. So James Hetfield, right? If Tony Iommi, kind of cemented metal's place in the world, James Hetfield helped get that sound, that heavier thrash sound to more people. And I mean, it's for good reason, because you're taking something, because metal, it takes technical prowess a lot of the time, especially in thrash metal, just for the ability to play that fast. And with their, with their fucking scales and shit, it all goes back to, your standard kind of, high tech metal playing. But what James Hetfield and Metallica did was make that sound more accessible to more people, put a nice little groove on it, made a pop metal song. That's what Enter Sandman is. Metallica managed to make a pop metal song, and it worked phenomenally. And actually, I'm sorry, Dave. I'm on your side most of the time, but I got to put James above you here. Got to put James above you here. James Hetfield is probably the most underrated guitarist in music. No, that is Mark Knopfler. That is Mark Knopfler. And I will defend that position till I die. Yeah, what's weird is that Kirk isn't on this list. So that is something kind of crazy. I would probably... Actually, that's funny that you say that James is better than Kirk, because I would put Kirk probably up here. But I'm putting James right there. So I want to put Johnny Ramone in great guitarists, but I got to put him probably at the top of good, because like James Hetfield, with the Ramones helped bring, punk rock into the scene. They weren't the first punk band, but god damn it, they were one of the best early ones, probably the best. And me being a punk guy, because as far as like favorite rock genre, I operate somewhere in between prog rock and punk, which I know operate at two completely different ends of the spectrum. It's just so good. Everything they did was so good for the most part. I don't know. Johnny Ramone played it hard and played it fast. And I think a little bit of him being a good guitarist may have to do with how iconic just the band was as a whole, but not enough to get him into icon tier and not enough to justify going into great. So actually, if I put Johnny Ramone in good, I probably should put Andy Summers in great, just because he's like so much better. Just the Police operated with a lot of like very unique rhythms, and Andy Summers fit right in there. Every part of the Police was amazing. Even though they all fucking hate each other, and it's so funny that they all hate each other. Andy Summers, man, no, he's a good guitarist. Andy Summers is a good guitarist. Now, this is probably the most controversial thing I'm gonna say, but Joe Perry. Actually, I don't know how controversial it is. The fact that I'm putting Joe Perry over Andy Summers, and I'm trying to think of who else is here. No. I feel good about that. Joe Perry being the lead guitarist for Aerosmith. I had an unhealthy obsession with Aerosmith when I was in 4th grade, and a lot of that had to do with Joe Perry. I thought Joe Perry was the coolest dude. But if we're talking about laying down a groove and like making music that would define the 1970s, Joe Perry's work on those early Aerosmith records, it's like almost unmatched. I mean, between tone and he's a very fine, technically abled guitar player. I think as a band, Aerosmith might not be in the same category of like upper echelon bands per se, but I think Joe Perry as a guitar player needs to get more flowers. All right, so a little bit more contemporary, even though, God, he's getting old now. We got Jack White. Jack White, you know what? If I put Josh Homme in great guitarist, I will put Jack White in great guitarist for, that early 2000s hard blues rock revival between, the White Stripes and the Black Keys, just distorted blues guitar chords is really what early White Stripes and Black Keys were all about. And, I know there's a huge bickering match between the White Stripes and the Black Keys that lasted on for years. But I would say that Jack White was probably the last true guitar hero and probably will remain the last true guitar hero. Unless somebody else comes along and just captures the hearts of millions who's known for playing the guitar, I don't know if you can beat Jack White in that regard. Oh, and then Jack White's an example of how the guitar sounded. So I think his abilities to create a nice jam and a good groove are all there. But it's just that dirtier sound. And I think, Josie, you hit it right on the nail there. Like Icky Thump is a perfect example. Like, that is just such a balls to the wall song. It's so nasty. This is a little bit off pace maybe, and I may be doing some restructuring after this video, but I don't know, I'm not. I think I'm pretty confident most of my choices here. I'm putting Joe Walsh in iconic because Joe Walsh's work with the James Gang and how guitar forward that group was, it wasn't like Eagles were bad before Joe Walsh, but Eagles rocked so much more with Joe Walsh. And as a standalone guitar player, Joe Walsh is one of the greatest of all time. And as a songwriter as well. But it's that guitar solo in Hotel California. It is so quintessential to the genre that his moment in that song, I think, did more for rock and roll than Hoobastank ever will. John Lennon, cool vibes. I feel like I should put Dimebag Darrell in iconic because who else's name is Dimebag Darrell? For those of you who don't know, Dimebag Darrell, the late guitarist for Pantera. I'll put Dimebag Darrell in great guitarist because I think their approach to metal, and a lot of that relies on the guitar folks, come on, was unique enough to where Dimebag Darrell kind of separates himself from the pack in a good way. You know, Pantera is not my favorite metal band to any degree, but I think you give credit where credit's due to a legend. So, okay, Kurt Cobain is going to go low, good, high, cool vibes. And a lot of that is just banking on the fact that the guitar solo in Bloom is just like, I've always talked shit on Kurt Cobain as a guitar player, but the one thing that saves it is the guitar solo in Bloom. Other than that, it's just like hardcore punky shit. That's about what it is. So Dick Dale, folks, he's going straight up to great. I'll put Dick Dale in great. You know, and you might say if you're one of these kids born in 2008, I don't know Dick Dale. Who the hell's Dick Dale? Does he know his name is Dick? He does, and you do. God, like, you're in the late 50s, and now, he's not moving very far on the fretboard there, but to play it at that speed and that precision is just a little, it's a little wacky, folks. It is a little wacky. All right, so Robbie Krieger from The Doors, good guitarist. I think The Doors as a band would go up way higher because The Doors are amazing. But if this was a list for keys, who's the keyboard player for The Doors? Ray Manzarek would definitely be way higher up on the keyboardist tier list. But this is the guitar tier list. Robbie goes in good. All right, so Steven Stills. Fuck Neil Young. We're going to put Steven Stills in good. We'll put him in good. A lot of that for me, you know, being a CSN fan, and I love CSN, but the fact that Treetop Flyer is still not on Spotify in its true form really pisses me off. There's just so many times I want to listen to Treetop Flyer, and I just can't get it done. All right, almost done here, folks. All right, so we got John from Red Hot Chili Peppers. This is where my preference is actually going to be ignored because I don't know if I've said as much in some of my other videos explicitly, but Red Hot Chili Peppers is a band that I really do not appreciate because I used to appreciate them a lot, and then I realized how much I overplayed they were. So I was like, okay, I'm kind of just tired of them. And then after a while, I was like, I kind of don't like any of this. But every time I say that I don't like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I have to say, but they have phenomenal musicians. And so John from Red Hot Chili Peppers is a great guitarist. Every single member of the Red Hot Chili Peppers would go into their respective tier lists in the great category. I would even say that Anthony Kiedis' voice, I think his songwriting is great, even though I kind of really don't like it. I don't know. There's just only so many times you can hear about California, but they have phenomenal musicians. I think Flea, their bassist, would go up into iconic or maybe even legend for bassists. But John definitely is a great guitarist. I got Dwayne Allman and Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers. There have been like other guitarists on here from the same band. So there are other guitarists from Megadeth and shit like that. And I know that we got 2 Beatles on here, but Dwayne Allman and Dickie Betts, I almost kind of want to put them in iconic. I don't know, at least at the top of great. The Allman Brothers are, it's some of the most magical music you will ever listen to, at least for me. I hold the Allman Brothers in very high regard, and I can't really differentiate a status as a, I can't really differentiate whether or not I want Dwayne Allman higher or Dickie Betts higher, so I'll put him in great, top of great. If I get enough arguments, I'll put him into iconic. No, so this is weird. So as far as, newer acts being on here, we got Josh Homme, we got Jack White, but Mike McCready's not on here. Mike McCready from Pearl Jam is the best live guitarist I've ever seen. I could not believe what I was seeing or listening to when I saw Pearl Jam live. Like because they don't play any of their songs like that straight. Like they do jam on them a little bit, and they give so much room to Mike. Like it got me mad as a guitar player, like how good Mike sounded. So we got Slash. Got to put him in iconic. This is where, you might say that, Keith Richards or Dimebag or even Dave Mustaine or James Hetfield is better than Slash, but the record sales beg to differ. And if we're talking about icons, I'm getting semantic with it. I know, but Slash is an icon. He is 150,000% an icon. I'd say, but now looking at it, I'm like, okay, Angus Young. Nah, I'm keeping Angus up there. I got to make people mad. Exactly, RVD. Guitar Hero 3 cements iconic status. Yeah, Slash was on the Legends of Rock, so that should say put him in Legend, but I'll keep him in iconic. Yeah. No, that fits. Buddy Holly's a good guitarist. Again, it's one of those deals where I think you could look at it and go like, okay, well, what's the deal between, Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly? I think Chuck Berry just played the shit out of the guitar a little bit more than Buddy Holly ever did. He's an icon, but not any more of an icon or any more of a better guitar player than anybody else. Actually, no, fuck that. Actually, not now that I say that, Buddy Holly's cool vibes. Buddy Holly's cool vibes. Let me get on my shit. Let me call myself out real quick. So looking at who we got left in the tier list, this is our last GOAT. This is, in my opinion, the greatest guitar player who has ever lived on the face of the planet. It is Eddie fucking Van Halen. I think he was the last celebrity to die that I cried over. Because I didn't know he had throat cancer, but actually, if you listen to like interviews from the 80s and like interviews till a couple years after he died, you'd go, oh my God. Dude always had a dart. Dude always had a dart. I will just encourage you all to listen to Spanish Fly by Van Halen, because I know that people will mostly point to Eruption being like, okay, this is like the guy, this is the true virtuoso, his technical prowess, and then his ability on other songs to just make a great pop rock jam. It's just very accessible. People point to Interruption going like, you cannot fuck with this guy, with the double tapping. As great as Eruption is, you need to listen to Spanish Fly, because it's like Eruption, but it's on an acoustic guitar. And I think it's a lot harder to play that shit and to play that good on an acoustic guitar. And the best part about Spanish Fly too is that you can hear his fingers on the fretboard, and I believe that he's playing on a classical guitar, so they're like nylon strings, and like you can hear those, like, they're not imperfections, but I feel it's the most intimate way to listen to Van Halen is by listening to Spanish Fly. You feel like you're right there in the room with him. I don't know. And then, they come out with this shit too. GOAT. Absolute GOAT. Will never not be the GOAT. Do not care. He is the greatest of all time. So next up, we got Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead. And I'm going to put Johnny Greenwood in great guitarist. but it really should be good guitarist. I'm overlooking it here a little bit, and I'm kind of breaking the rules just because Jonny Greenwood, as a composer and as a producer of music, is one of the best to have ever done it. And, you know, I started listening to Radiohead as a result of this YouTube channel, and am continuously inspired by what Radiohead I've listened to, and I'm very excited to listen to more. So if you want to see me react to more Radiohead, let me know down in the comments. But Jonny Greenwood, he's a phenomenal composer, and I think, I'll put him in good guitarist. I'll be honest. I'll be honest with it. I think he's just fine guitarist, but if we're looking at like composer, songwriter, he's somewhere around here. He just is. All right, Alex Lifeson. I'm gonna put Alex Lifeson in iconic for technical ability alone. Alex Lifeson being the guitarist from Rush. Every musician in Rush is one of the best in their respective instruments. And I think it's a shame that I think Alex is probably the less well-known, because Geddy Lee, I think, ranks higher as far as greatest bassist of all time. Neil Peart, obviously, on any short list of greatest drummers of all time, like whether it's 3 or 5, or I'd say if Neil Peart isn't on your greatest drummers of all time and he's not in the top 10, what the fuck are you doing? But I think Alex Lifeson gets overlooked a little bit too much. And I was listening to Spirit of the Radio the other day, and just how hard Alex comes in on that song and keeps it there. It's just so good. See, Neil Young, that's how you become a Canadian baddie. You be Alex Lifeson. So next up, we got Jay Mascis. And Jay Mascis is a great guitarist. I think Jay Mascis is indie rock's guitar hero. Jay Mascis, obviously, from Dinosaur Jr. And probably one of the least known guitarists on the list to the general public, as it were. But there's no mistaking just how guitar forward Dinosaur Jr.'s sound was. But he's just a very, very, very talented guitar player. So we got Peter Buck from REM. Good guitarist. REM's not really known. It's all Michael Stipe. Let's be real, folks. That's why you go to REM. Nels Cline is a great guitarist. So Nels Cline from Wilco. He has a lot of technical ability, but not necessarily technical as far as metal goes. So Wilco kind of operates in a Americana, indie folk, indie rock kind of vibe. And Nels' approach to playing guitar is very subtle, and kind of going off of where I put Jonny Greenwood, is a phenomenal composer and songwriter, but a little bit more guitar forward for me than Jonny. So he's going up to great in my opinion. All right, Randy Rhoads, folks. Randy Rhoads is a legend, gone well before his time. Randy Rhoads, obviously the guy who did this. And also, Randy Rhoads, somebody gone well before his time. There is a great clip of Ozzy hearing an outtake of Randy's while recording for this song that he had never heard before. And Ozzy's just so moved and remembers Randy, and it almost made me cry. Randy Rhoads, obviously cemented. If you hear people in my middle school, the very few kids that I knew who listened to classic rock and shit like that, were talking mad shit on Randy Rhoads, and I could not believe it. I had to get some of the older kids that listen to classic rock to come back me up. All right, Johnny Marr, the Smiths. The Smiths suck, so they're gonna go in medium, and I will elaborate no further. And we have Robert Fripp from King Crimson, rounding out my list of the greatest classic rock guitarists of all time. And I should put him in legend because he's a legend to me, but I'll put him in iconic because I think he's better than great. King Crimson is the quintessential progressive rock band, in my opinion, whether or not it's the 80s shit where they what the fuck was any of that, between Beat, between Discipline, between Three Pairs. What's that album called? Three of a Perfect Pair. That's what that album's called. Or Court of the Crimson King, or Lark's Tongue and Aspic. It's Bobby Fripp. It's Bobby Fripp. Recently, some old members of King Crimson went out and performed some of that 80s catalog live with, Steve Vai, who I cannot believe is not on this tier list, but he's not on this tier list, and Danny Carey from Tool behind the drums. And they wanted to play some songs off of Discipline and off of Beat. And apparently Steve Vai was like, I can't play Fripp. I can't play some of these songs. Like, I am physically not able to play these songs. I think just off of that, if that's all you know about Bobby Fripp, just know that. And so there it is, folks. This is my rankings of the best guitarists of all time. So let me know what you thought of my list. Did I make some good points? Did I ramble on too much? Or do you think Gen Z should just keep their mouths shut? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, I'll be linking this tier list down in the description so you can play around with it yourself. If you want to check me live sometime, make sure you pay attention to the community tab or just follow me with one of the links down in the description. But with that said, I've been Jerry Bees. You've been awesome. Take it easy.
Diggity dog. Breaking. Diggity dog.